Before going on to this evening's topic of the Four Noble Truths, is there any questions regarding any of the practices today that anyone would still like to ask?
I have a question about the meditation of the rhythm and relaxation, because when I relax or let go, I don't know how you say English, when I take out air.
When you breathe out?
When I breathe out. So there's something active about it. Like I noticed in the rhythm meditation, it was confusing for me.
Active as if you were pushing the air out. Is that what you mean by active?
I engage, there's an action I do on the body of releasing.
Yeah.
So
you mean in terms of relaxing the body during the out breath, or you mean in terms of doing something with the actual breath?
That's where I get confused, I think.
Yeah. So of course what we're suggesting is that the out breath is a very good time to relax the body. It's a natural time to relax. So that's active, and we want to do that. We want to relax the body more and more. But what we don't want to do is somehow manipulate the breath, push the breath out, for example, or try and make it rhythmic. So during the out breath, if you're actively releasing tension in the body, that's very good. That's very good. Okay, let's go for this evening's topic then. And just to review or recap what we covered last night, so where we know where this Four Noble Truths fits in the bigger picture. We said that the Buddha's teachings we can group into three classes of teachings called the three turnings of the wheel. And the first turning of the wheel, the Four Noble Truths, is the first teaching the Buddha gave, and that's going to be the topic for this evening. And in these teachings, which form the basis of all Buddhist traditions, the Buddha is describing what is our current condition, why are we stuck in this state, and he's describing the fact that we can achieve liberation from suffering, a healthy state, and then how we go about doing that. So in these systems of teachings, the final goal of the spiritual path is nirvana. And how we achieve that goal through what is the vipassana practice, what is the insight we have to gain to achieve that goal, is again to realize no self, that the fundamental ignorance we are afflicted by, that is the root of all of our suffering, is grasping onto self. And we'll look a little bit later in the presentation, what do we mean by this word self? And so here, in these systems of teachings, the Buddha said that actually how we see the world is not a problem. There is an independent, objective world out there, just as there appears to be. So there's no problem there at all. It's only how we see ourselves as a person that's the problem. In the second turning of the wheel, called the Perfection of Wisdom teachings, here the Buddha said, actually there's a deeper level of ignorance than just grasping to self. How we see the world is also a problem. The world does not exist as it appears. So in these systems of teachings, the wisdom that we need to cultivate is this wisdom of emptiness, to come to realize nothing exists independently. And the final goal of this, these teachings in these teachings is enlightenment. That this is personal liberation from suffering, and this is the further goal of enlightenment. And what the differences are, we're going to also look at later. But nirvana is a stepping stone to enlightenment. These teachings here, of course, teachings on emptiness, can be easily misinterpreted to mean nothing exists and therefore fall to the extreme of nihilism. So to avoid that, we have the third wheel of Dharma, called fine distinction. And so here, like the second turning of the wheel, the final goal of spiritual path is enlightenment. But in these teachings, what the Buddha said was that since there is no, in the second wheel he rejected the idea that there is an external independent world. And so since the world, there's no independent external world, it's coming from our mind. Therefore here, he said that since everything's coming from the mind is real, because the mind is the source of everything. So we can hold on to the mind as something real, and thereby avoid slipping into nihilism. But also in this third turning of the wheel, they also talk about this idea of emptiness. But it's not the same meaning. Here, emptiness means nothing exists independently. Here, emptiness means that the world is empty of being external to the mind. That the world is internal to the mind. So that's what emptiness means here. So they use the same word, but not the same meaning.
Can you repeat it, please?
Yeah. So emptiness here means everything is empty of being independent. Nothing exists independently. Everything's empty of existing in that way. Here, of course, the mind is real, so it's not empty of independent existence. So the word emptiness here is referring to the external world. That here there is an external world, but here we're saying that because the world is a product of our mind, there's no external world. There appears to be, but it's internal to the mind. So emptiness here means that the external world is empty of being external to the mind, meaning it's not external to the mind. That's what emptiness means here. So in these teachings, effectively what's being said is there's no material world whatsoever. And the example they often give here is like a dream. In a dream, when we're dreaming, we come up to things in the dream, they seem very solid and real and tangible. But if we become lucid in the dream, we'll realize this dream world, which seems to be material, is in fact not material at all. It's a nature of the mind. It's internal to the mind. So they say similarly here, if we investigate this external world, which appears to be an external material world, we'll come to realize there's no such world. And that's the idea of emptiness here. These teachings were the teachings that initially spread from India into Sri Lanka and down through Southeast Asia. So these teachings form the basis of now the modern day Theravada Buddhist traditions. that they're based on the Four Noble Truths transmitted through the Pali language. These sets of teachings here then are what's spread over the Himalayas into China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and into Tibet. So these traditions, now called Mahayana traditions, are based on these systems of teachings, particularly this one here. So what we're going to do this evening is have a look at the Four Noble Truths in some more detail, and then tomorrow we're going to have a look at the Mahayana traditions, and also I want to then look a little bit at what's called Vajrayana or Tantra. But this evening we're going to look at the Four Noble Truths, the foundation of all Buddhist traditions. So often when some concept is presented in Buddhism, to help better understand that concept, often certain analogies are given to make it more easy to understand. And here in the Four Noble Truths, usually the analogy that is given to help understand what the Four Noble Truths mean is the analogy of a physical illness. That if we think we are sick, usually the first thing we do is go to the doctor. And what is the first thing the doctor will do for us? Diagnosis. And usually that diagnosis has two steps. First, they would look at what symptoms are displaying themselves. Maybe they do certain checks, check the blood pressure and pulse, and maybe they take some blood tests and do other checks just to see what's going on in the body. What are the symptoms? What condition do we find the body in? And then based on this, what they discover, they would then determine what is the underlying illness that is presenting itself in this way. And the analogy we're using here is the analogy of a curable illness. So what comes after diagnosis?
Cure.
Before that? Prognosis. So prognosis is that, I believe this is your illness. Can we do something about that? Is it curable or not? So the prognosis is that we can be cured, healthy state. And then, of course, comes the next step is they would give us the medicine, the cure. So we have these sort of 4 steps we go through. So similarly, the Buddha is like our doctor. That he is diagnosing what is our current condition. And so the first noble truth is what is the human condition? What condition do we find ourselves in? And then usually, again, this is presented or translated as suffering. But as we saw earlier today, in this afternoon session, this word suffering is coming from the word dukkha. So what is the human condition is dukkha. So remember, to understand what we really mean by this, we have that presentation this afternoon of the 3 types or 3 levels of dukkha. That part of the human condition is we have what's called the dukkha of suffering, which is just our unpleasant experiences. Part of the human condition is the dukkha of change, which is describing our pleasant experiences. But underlying both our pleasant and unpleasant experiences, at the deepest level, we had this all-pervasive dukkha. The fact that our life is pervaded by the potential for suffering to arise in our life. So this is what the word dukkha means. This is the human condition. Sometimes we have pleasant experiences, sometimes unpleasant experiences, but underlying both of those types of experiences is the fact there's always a potential for suffering to arise in our life. So that is the human condition, translated here most commonly as suffering. Then part of the diagnosis is what is underlying illness? What is the cause? What is causing these symptoms? What is the cause of dukkha? And so the second noble truth is the cause or origin of dukkha or suffering. And when we look at this, what is the underlying cause or origin of dukkha or suffering? Here we identify two things. The mental afflictions, and then our actions that are driven by our mental afflictions. So within these mental afflictions, again, the sort of condensed presentation is these three poisons. The three main mental afflictions are these three poisons: ignorance, attachment, and aversion. And that ignorance, of course, is our distorted view of reality. And here, in the Four Noble Truths, that fundamental ignorance is this ignorance grasping to a self. What that means is that now there seems to be a me here somewhere that seems to be more than just the body and the mind. There seems to be something in addition to the body and the mind here. There seems to be a me here somewhere, and that me seems to be more than just the body and the mind. And we have that in our language. We often say, I have a body, I have a mind, as if there's a third thing, a me that has a body and has a mind. And that me seems to be something more than just the body and the mind. That is the idea of self. That's how we believe we exist, as something extra, more solid, in addition to the body and the mind. And that's grasping to self. And if we can come to realize we do not exist in this way, we can realize there's no self, we can eliminate these mental afflictions and then the suffering that they produce. And of course, these mental afflictions are driving our behaviour, our actions, and every action we do based on a mental affliction has a result. And our actions lead to our experiences, and our experiences collectively are called dukkha. So we'll have a look at this process in more detail on day 9, when we look at the Vipassana practice. We'll look at these steps in more detail. But is there any questions so far? Anything not clear?
I'm not trying to be argumentative, I just want to understand. In the third return of the will, it says that everything here is my imagination, right?
No.
It's
No.
a product of my mind, everything.
Right, so in the first turning of the wheel, the assertion is, in terms with respect to the world, is that there is an external, independent world. And that world, of course, is a material world. Both, in these two sets of teachings, they both refute this. They say there's no external independent world. But in these two teachings, they come to different conclusions. In this one, they say that in fact there is no external world whatsoever. It's internal to the mind.
So there is no physical world?
Correct. No, there's no matter at all. There seems to be, but if we look closely, we'll realise it's an illusion. And they use the example of the dream. When we're dreaming, there also seems to be a material world. The dream world appears to be material, solid. But if we become lucid in the dream, we'll realise that appearance is deceiving us. There's no material world in the dream. So they say if we investigate this world in the waking world closely, we'll come to the same realisation. So that's emptiness for them. So they say that there is no external world whatsoever because the world is internal to the mind. So they say there's an internal independent world, not external. In these teachings, the emptiness or the conclusion is there is an external world, but it's dependent. It's not independent. So here, of course, there is a material world, but it's not independent of the mind. Here, there's no material world whatsoever.
I cannot say what he said, that I'm not arrogant. I am arrogant. And what I would like to say, if Buddha would wake up today,
If what?
if Buddha would come alive today, he would say, I don't know this concept of three wheels. What are you talking about? I taught for 45 years, whatever I had, like Freud, like Wittgenstein, like many other, there are many contradictions in what I say. It's very nice of you to divide it and to say that I spoke different voice to different people. Bullshit. I spoke what I taught. I taught what I taught. That's what I know.
Exactly. And to help us better understand all these things...
That's legitimate.
Sorry?
That's legitimate that he has a contradiction in his theory. It's all right.
There's no contradictions for him.
This is not contradiction. The three wheels.
No.
You mean not contradiction?
No.
This one he said this one. This one he said something different. If it's different, it's contradiction.
They are like stepping stones.
It's a nice word, Glen. It's a very nice word, but it's contradicting. It's very simple.
Right, but as I said before, the example is when we're in school and the teacher tells us about atoms, what they tell us is a lie, isn't it?
Yes,
But it's helpful, isn't it?
it is.
So similarly, from this perspective, these are not true, but they're helpful.
Yes.
So these are helpful to get us to this understanding.
Okay.
So that's what we're talking about here. So of course what we learn in primary school about atoms is contradictory,
It's contradictory.
but it's useful.
But now at the age of 72, you can skip 1 and 2. You can go.
Ah,
I don't have so much time. No. No,
yes, that's true. But again, this view here, as we're going to see on day 9,
it's unbelievable.
it's very difficult to appreciate.
Yes, I understand.
And we're going to look at
I love you too. Thank you.
we're going to look at what's the presentation called the two extremes, and we're going to see how the philosophical systems that came out of the first and the third, how they're useful in helping us to move towards that understanding. If we can go directly here and understand it, fantastic. We don't need them. We don't need them, you're right. But there's a big danger because this view is very subtle, very difficult to appreciate. The danger is that if we go straight here, we misunderstand this and we think, oh, nothing really exists. In fact, there's the great Indian master Nagarjuna in the 2nd century, who's the founder of this Madhyamika system. He wrote a classic text called Mula Madhyamika Karika. And some modern day scholars modern day, 21st century, who are very intelligent, super intelligent philosophers, read Nagarjuna and say, Nagarjuna's a nihilist.
Yes.
Nihilist. So this is very intelligent philosophers who've done a lot of study. They read Nagarjuna and say, Nagarjuna, you didn't get it right. This means nothing exists. This is very intelligent people. So it's not so easy. I mean, if we're super intelligent and we can understand it, yes, you're right, we don't need them. We don't need them.
And from this I can conclude that the Theravada believers, the people Theravada, accept the fact that they are inferior to the Mahayana.
See, this is where we have to distinguish between philosophical system and practitioner.
In Hebrew?
So we have different philosophical systems, and a particular Buddhist tradition may use one of that as the basis, but then when someone looks at that and practices, they may come to a much deeper realization than what's written in the philosophical system. So even though you may be in a Buddhist tradition where the philosophical system you're following is not the highest view, if you're very sharp, you'll get there through your practice. So they'll all get to the same point, is the bottom line.
Means you are Mahayana.
Huh?
From this I can conclude that you are Mahayana. No, because if I would ask, a Theravada, a monk, not a big shot, a monk, he should admit, yes, we are inferior to Mahayana.
No.
Ask Theravada, sorry.
No, he would be, I don't know, everyone's individual, but you may get, one response may be, like I said, these modern philosophers saying Nagarjuna is a nihilist, though some of these people following these traditions will look at this and go, this is wrong, this is not right, in fact.
So this division is some, when was it first came up as a division of three wheels?
Oh, it just, already very shortly after the Buddha's teachings, because, the Buddha taught according to people's capacities. So he taught this here, here. And so if you want to go directly into the sutras to try to make some sense of all of this, you probably get confused, because he said this here. He said, 10 different things. Well, what's going on here? Exactly. So what happened was then, of course, the Indian masters and then the Tibetan masters after that did all this work for us. They did all this work and put all these various teachings together in nice packages for us to understand them in this way. Otherwise, for us, if we had to go straight to the sutras, it'd be very difficult. Very difficult. And then probably what we would do is we'd read it a bit and we go, this Buddha doesn't know what he's talking about. He's saying 6 different things here. That's rubbish. Maybe that's what we do.
You didn't mention the dependent horizon. Is it implicit that if it's emptiness, then it's...
Okay, so a short answer, and then we'll look at this in detail on day 9. All of these, of course, talk about dependent arising. All Buddhist traditions and philosophical systems say there's dependent arising. What we mean by that is different in each of the philosophical systems, and we'll have a look at that on day 9, what that really means.
What the third wheel of Dharma added, or what is it's meant by the third wheel of Dharma comparing son to the second?
So the third is a stepping stone from the first to the second. Because to go from first to second, there's much danger that you fall straight into nihilism. That you don't understand this and you go straight into nihilism. So this is a stepping stone to this.
How?
By understanding that something is real, the mind. The mind is real here. Here, nothing's real.
But from the other hand, it says, but nothing out there.
No. Yes.
So it's not exactly. It's of course it's gives some anchor. You say it gives something to hold to, but it can be also confusing to say nothing out there, nothing material. Everything is just mind.
I don't know. I think they have a very strong argument. No, I mean, as I said, in the dream, there really appears